break, and we've got
Awesome.
a different lunch break than we normally do. We actually have a picked out topic and a bunch of people gathered around who know or care or want to talk about it. So here we are. Welcome. We've got Stanley, I think, was a little bit of the ringleader. Is that right?
Yeah. I was the dude who knew the philosopher and the dude who knew some tech people and
Yeah,
wanted them to chat with each other.
sometimes the best thing is just know a bunch of people and get them all in the same place.
Yeah, definitely.
And then,
Do you want me
so
to do a
Stanley,
little intros?
yeah, sure.
Uh, so how we doing on the camera? We're all good though? We're fine? We're not gonna worry about it. Sorry. Got it. Okay. I welcome everyone. I'm Stan. I'm I guess cannabis attorney. I'm in-house counsel at Weedmaps. So I have no reason to be here except that I used to be sort of a philosopher and have interest in random stuff and tech policy and things like that, and apparently digital art, even though I don't know anything about art. But I do know a whole bunch of philosophers, and I know some philosophers of art, and one of them is Erich, who's also here. Erich is a professor at Wellesley. He went to grad school with me at Berkeley. He does all sorts of interesting work on art and authenticity, and also, forgive me, Erich, I'm going to use the label sort of cancel culture in the arts and things like that. But I'll let him speak to his interests more specifically. We also have I always get this wrong, the outside inside counsel for Dapper Labs, who some of you might know as the company behind Top Shots. So NBA Top Shots, a big NFT thing that's been happening recently. I'll let Scott speak more specifically as to the technology and also the platform and all that, because honestly, I don't have the details. But welcome, everyone. And I think I'll get us kicked off by sort of saying why it is philosophers find this. Because I asked Erich to do this. He's like, I don't actually know that much about NFTs or anything like that. But he has been digging in a little bit in the last few weeks. And it's funny because he sent me all these sort of side emails over the past few weeks being like, what is going on here? Like, what is this? What does this even mean? And I had the very same reaction when I was reading articles about this. And also as a lawyer, some of the licensing issues also strike me as shocking, or at least potentially misleading, or at the very least just simply interesting legally. So I think Scott can give us a lot of insight on that. But I think it would be nice to start off. Maybe DK, you could kick it off and sort of tell us what you know about the basic technology behind this, just so we're on the same page. I'm sure many people in the audience know much more than me about it. So
Sure, yeah,
could you do that?
I can give some of that. So, in short, I would say there's kind of, in a sense, there's nothing new under the sun. The technology is just stuff that enables existing human behaviors and experiences, and it's like a new way to think about it and a new way to sort of implement it. But it's ultimately the same kinds of things that, same types of human behaviors and patterns that exist in other places, like maybe in the traditional art world. Now, I'm not an expert at the traditional art world, so I don't have a ton to offer there. But from my observations of it, I think there's a lot of pieces that make that world work that we're now trying to figure out how those pieces map in technology environments today. So, there's like the galleries where the stuff is shown, and there's the curators, and there's the investors, and all of these parties are coordinating in different ways to effectively create value or agree on value in art. And we sort of don't have very storied and historied names and brands and venues and people in the NFT world. So I think we're sort of all scrambling to figure out exactly what that does look like or should look like or will look like, but probably a lot of the same human patterns underlie it. So, just to give a little bit of the basics on the kind of the technology or product side of NFTs, the idea of NFTs in kind of the current instantiation is NFT obviously stands for non-fungible token. And the idea of the current wave of NFTs is to try to use cryptocurrencies or cryptocurrency platforms or blockchains secured by cryptocurrencies to enable these assets to not be controlled by anybody, to sort of not have central authorities that we have to rely on trust for. So, it kind of grew out of the otherwise, the cryptocurrency store of value world that Bitcoin came out of. So Bitcoin is a fungible token. Like if I give you a Bitcoin, you give me another Bitcoin back. We shouldn't really care which Bitcoin is which. So kind of all meant to be pretty fungible, so that we don't care about it. Non-fungible tokens are things that are designed to not be fungible. So like this piece of art is very different than this other piece of art, versus like this Bitcoin is supposed to be the same as this Bitcoin. Like I'm indifferent which one I'm holding. But in the art world, you care if you have a Mona Lisa versus something that your kid drew. Those are non-fungible. They're not interchangeable with each other. So the technologies and products are meant to enable people to point to pieces of art from a given blockchain, to point to a piece of art and say, this is the unique pointer to that piece of art. And it's not to say I own that piece of art, but it's like I have the pointer that we're all collectively as a community agreeing is the important pointer to care about. And so what is it, how do you secure it? Where do you show it off? How does it create, like what kind of community gathers around to imbue it with value? How much of it is IP that's already understood in the world versus new IP that's being introduced to the world in this context? So there's just like tons of questions, but ultimately what you're doing is you're creating a community and assembling a community of people who care about a thing, and you're creating that agreed upon desire for that thing to be important, culturally relevant. And all that a blockchain is like cryptographic, signatures that verify that you own the pointer to the thing that everybody agrees is important. So I'd say that's kind of, high level overview. I don't know if that kind of strikes any questions in people's minds, but that's sort of like at least a little bit of the basics on it.
Let's get Erich in on this, because you were very careful, DK, to say you own the unique pointer to the art, and you also qualified by saying you don't own the art. So I think that's already controversial. I get the sense in which you don't own the art, like you don't have some kind of magical copyright to the sort of work, so to speak, metaphorically speaking, behind the digital file that it points to. Right? Yeah. You don't even have such a thing when you buy a regular digital photo, just to be clear, right? Yep. Erich, what do you think about this? Like, because I know philosophers operate often by analogies. We do a lot of analogical thinking, right? And is there anything in the art world, in your opinion, that has this kind of thing, this kind of structure? You own a unique pointer to art, but you don't own the art.
Yeah, I mean, the best analogy that I came up with when I was doing reading about NFTs, because like everybody else, I'm not an expert in NFTs, but I do this work that Stan was talking about a broad set of topics in the philosophy of art, including ones about authenticity. And so, I've been doing a bunch of reading, and I think there's a lot of misleading stuff that people say in popular media right now. So like one thing that Stan and I were emailing about this. One thing I find is really odd is that you see this locution often where people will say, like, you bought an NFT of a thing, right? And that's misleading, right? Because it doesn't quite capture what David was just talking about, right? Saying it's an NFT of a thing makes it sound like it's a representation or something, right? But it's not actually, right, the thing itself, right? It's a pointer. It's pointing to a thing. So I think the best analogy that I could come up with for thinking about this was that it seems like NFTs are similar to, if you could buy naming rights to a public park, right? And then those naming rights remained for sale on the market, right? So you can be like, people, this is my park, but you don't have any of the other property rights that we often think about, right? You don't have the right of excludability, right? You can't be like, you can't come in this park right now. It doesn't make it a private park, right? It's still a public park. Anybody can still download the file, right? But you have this thing that says, but right now, right, it's mine, right? That's the tricky thing. It's right. It's like you want to say that it's mine in some respect, but really the only thing you have is the pointer, right? So like there's to the extent to which you own something, you own a thing pointing to another thing. So the thing that I keep coming back to and thinking about this is people keep, writing these things like, oh, this is like revolutionary. It's going to change art, right? It's going to change the art world. And maybe it will. But I have a lot of questions about how it's going to do that, because there seems to be this really fundamental disconnect between the NFT and the work, right? So like I saw one article that said like NFTs solve this problem about ownership of digital art. And I was like, I don't think so. I don't think they actually solve any problems about ownership of digital art. What they might do is solve a problem about commodification of digital art, right? So like David was saying, right, the way this is going to function depends on a kind of shared agreement about the value of these pointers, right? So provided that that can remain stable, right, and that's of course a huge if, then you have a mechanism for people to profit off of digital art. And so that could have an influence on the art world indirectly, right? It could make it viable for people to work in a medium of digital art that was previously difficult to commodify. But it feels, at least at this moment, still like very, very chancy, because the ability to do that is going to depend on sort of continued, right, shared agreement around the value of these NFTs, which are themselves independent of the works. So I don't want to ramble too much.
Do you mind if I jump in on that? I had just a thought hearing Erich speak.
Please.
So one of the things, so I'm Steve, by the way. Hi. I've heard lots of really wonderful things about RenCo, and I'm honored that you've asked me to come and to join you. So we had this conversation. So I've been involved with Dapper Labs since its inception. They were a small Vancouver-based startup. I'm outside general counsel for a number of different startups in the Bay Area and in Vancouver. And three and a half years ago, they came to me and said, "We want to put cats on the blockchain." I said, "What's a blockchain?" And they then sort of walked through the process with me. I helped build out the product as well as the terms of service, which I know, Stan, you had asked about in terms of what does it mean to own a thing, right? And Erich, you spoke to this as well. We got lots and lots of questions. So when we released CryptoKitties and it went viral in late 2018, early 2019, the big question is, well, what do I own? Do I own my CryptoKitty, right? And the answer, I think, and this comes up now again in Top Shot, right? The Top Shot question of, do I, when I spend $200,000 to buy a moment of a LeBron James dunk, do I own that? What do I own? Right? It's the right question. But I think where things go off the rails a bit is that people don't analogize it to maybe don't create the appropriate analogy. When you buy a trading card of Stan Musial, or a Michael Jordan card that you bought at the store, the fact that you own that piece of paper does not give you the right to create a picture of Michael Jordan and sell it on t-shirts.
Right.
It doesn't mean that you own Michael. It doesn't mean that you own anything about him, right? All it means is that you own this thing that has some value, as I think Erich and DK both said correctly. The value is not it's not the value of the cardboard, right? The cardboard costs nothing. You could go online right now and watch a video of Michael Jordan dunk for free. So why the heck would you pay for it? That's the real question. Because what you own is when you buy something in physical form, so if you have a copy of a Van Gogh, you don't have the right to commercialize the Van Gogh. But does it make it any less valuable to you? And so I don't know if I'm adding more questions than I am answering them, but the approach that we take at Dapper is that you own the underlying digital token, and that the art is licensed to you, in the case of Top Shot, for unlimited non-commercial use. So in that respect, you have even more rights than you would if you say you go to the store and you buy an Olaf plush toy from Frozen, right? You've bought that. Does that mean that you can commercialize Olaf? No. It means you can use the plush toy. In this case, you have even more rights than going to the store and buying the Olaf plush toy.
Yeah, thanks for bring to fore these questions about exactly the license right you do have. You know, my understanding is that right now there's no standardized licensing terms that come associated with the digital token, although pretty certainly you own the token itself, right? I know there's this NFT 2.0 license out there in the world where you have a limited right of commercialization up to 100K gross for the year, something like that, which is again more than you own with the Olaf stuffed toy. So that's pretty interesting from a legal perspective. But I want to sort of hark back because I think, Eric, there's this tendency to think that this is just about commodifying something as opposed to there being anything aesthetically interesting about it as a medium. And I want to sort of press you on that. So it strikes me like that there is an analogy in the contemporary art world, actually, you know, older than the contemporary art world, of the signed print, right? So yeah, when you own a Van Gogh, it's really hard to reproduce a Van Gogh. And that alone creates a certain form of scarcity. Now, I don't want to equate scarcity with aesthetic value here, but aesthetic value often entails a scarcity, right? In when we think of sort of old masters paintings, right? We sort of associate the two. But once we started to have printmaking techniques where you could start doing lithographs and these sorts of things in a pretty repeatable fashion, then people start to doubt, you know, it's not that one Mona Lisa in the Louvre, right? There's like 100 of these. So is it still really the same? Is it still really worth that much if you can only have one only of 100? And what happens then is that you have this reproducibility technologically become feasible, and it becomes faster and better and more exact in terms of replication. And I think that creates a form of doubt, right? And you have artistic practices. This is all pre-digital art, right? Artistic practices where you have people release quote unquote limited editions of prints. And if your limited edition is pretty small, you generate a form of scarcity. You're saying you're effectively having the artist now certify. I promise you, this stuff is really valuable. Forget about the reproducibility behind it, the easy mechanical reproducibility, right? There's this famous Walter Benjamin article sort of on whether the arts become, you know, once they become mechanical, whether it loses its aura and thus its aesthetic value. He sort of raises those sorts of themes, right? These are old philosophy of art themes, old practices. So, you know, it strikes me that the signed print comes with it not just an issue of commodification, but sort of new artistic possibilities come about with that new practice. And I'm wondering, Eric, if you think new artistic possibilities can come about with this sort of practice, which is a little bit analogous.
Yeah, it's really interesting, Stan. I mean, I remain unsure how analogous it is, and I will try to explain why. So, in the trading card case that Steve just mentioned, I mean, I think what Stan brought out is important is that the trading card is not just a piece of cardboard, right? It's a piece of cardboard with some particular markings on it that make it, right, relatively unique among pieces of cardboard, right? And the rarer the card is, generally, right, the more value it's going to have, right? So one thing that NFTs do is they introduce scarcity, and quite radical scarcity because of their uniqueness, right, to an artistic medium that is, in theory, infinitely reproducible, right? So you don't have, right, the scarcity that you often have generated by physical things when you're talking about digital artworks. When it comes to thinking about the question of, you know, a signature, sort of signing something in relation to NFTs versus, right, prints or something like that, I'm not entirely sure the analogy works perfectly. So, you know, when we think about the authenticity of an artwork, there are a number of different things we might have in mind, right? One is something having a certain history, right? A certain causal history, right? Being produced in a certain way. When it comes to sort of traditional fine arts, that method of production is usually, right, being produced by the artist's own hand, right? But not necessarily, right? Sometimes it's not just about the artist's own hand. Sometimes it's also about the artist authorizing that thing, right? So even, you know, in the Renaissance or whatever, you have work coming out of an artist's studio. Not everything is necessarily by the artist's hand, but it's authorized by the artist, right? And so both of those features, right, are doing work in our thinking about what makes something count as authentic. The worry I have about analogizing NFTs to the signature in the way that I take it you're suggesting, Stan, is that because they stand apart from the work in this important way, I'm not sure that they can actually achieve that same authorization, right? Because, like, when you think about the limited edition prints, right? So you got a matrix, you can pull prints off of it, right? And the artist says, I'm going to make 30, right? And those are the ones, right? You could still, right, use that same matrix, right, and keep pulling prints off. But if the artist said, no, those are not the artworks, right? Then you have a basis for saying, like, well, okay, these ones that the artist authorized, right, and signed have a certain value, and the other ones that got pulled off and that have the same causal history, right, they don't actually have that value. They don't count as being genuine. I'm not sure that same mechanism can happen with NFTs, right? Because with the NFT, you say, okay, like, I own this token that's pointing to this work, right? But it doesn't actually limit in any way the reproducibility of the work. The only thing that's limited is the NFT, right? And so I feel like that disconnect, right, the metaphysical distance between the NFT and the work itself prevents it from functioning in the same way as some of these other cases where scarcity is introduced in the art world. I'm open to changing my mind about that. That's just my initial worry. I'm curious what others think about it.
I'll raise, there's an even bigger gap, I think, than we've highlighted or discussed here yet, which is we keep saying, like, the NFT or the pointer. And the reality of it is, because we don't have an agreed upon single blockchain to represent these, there's no single ledger. You actually can have a pointer with respect to one blockchain. I can go invent a totally new blockchain and make another pointer to the same piece of art. And so you can actually have any number of blockchains all with pointers to the same piece of art. And so,
David, you mean DK? You mean the same file, exact same file on IFFT or whatever is?
Yeah, let's take, like, a really simple example of this. Is there was a bunch of bidding around the I think around Jack Dorsey's first tweet, right? Just setting up my Twitter, and I forget if he was involved or some other people, but I think it got bid up to be, I don't know, several $100,000 or several $1 million on a particular blockchain. But it wasn't like the blockchain. There's no the blockchain. It's a blockchain that people have gathered and built consensus that that's the place that they want to bid on and represent Jack Dorsey's NFT. Now, if Jack Dorsey wanted, he could launch his own blockchain and be like, actually, this is the one where the real pointer to my real first tweet lives. And so you can all bid over on mine over here, which is the real one. So even the definition of what is the right blockchain to represent the pointer to the asset, we don't have scarcity of blockchains. So it's just another point. Though that's kind of like, maybe gets us a little further afield on the scarcity question.
I'd be happy. Do you mind if I jump in on that part?
Yeah, please.
It's really interesting. You folks are bringing up some really neat points, and I'm seeing some comments. I see Robbie's question in thread, and I think that's a really useful one too. Like, people are utilizing NFTs and creating scarcity in a variety of different ways now. One of the things that you may have seen is that there are some artists who are thinking about this extremely creatively and coming up with actual physical pieces of art, which they then are offering tokens to purchase. But the purchase of the token, the purchase of the NFT, they don't actually get the art. Imagine that the art is sitting in a vault somewhere, right? And there's 100 of these pieces of art. You buy an NFT to one of these pieces of art, and you can trade in the NFT at any point, and the piece of art will be sent to you. Or you can burn the NFT, and the art will be destroyed. And you'll see when this happens that people are trading these NFTs and selling them multiples, creating more and more and more value through the process. And the owner of the original artwork, the creator, gets a cut every single time that the NFT gets sold. And so one of the large questions I think that's being presented here is does the existence of a piece of physical art undercut or elevate the value of the token? I don't know that I know the answer to that clearly. But if you take the other question, which is sort of what Robbie was asking, which is, well, what prevents? And for those of you who haven't gone on to Top Shot, I encourage you to at least just take a look at it because it's really interesting. Like I was the one who drafted the NFT 2.0 license, Stan, and I've been thinking about this stuff a lot. And obviously we couldn't let people commercialize the NBA stuff like we could CryptoKitty stuff because it's not ours to give. But the question that Robbie asked is, well, what's to prevent you when and DK asked a similar question, you've created 1,000 of these things to create scarcity, right? What's to prevent you from making more? It really is part of the smart contract. You can build it into the system that once, if you establish, I'm only going to mint 1,000 of these, I suppose there's nothing preventing you from going on another blockchain and doing it entirely, separately. The value of a Michael Jordan dunk in this case, could you take it and do something else with it because it's freely available in public? Sure, you'd be violating the NBA's intellectual property by doing so, but the NBA could do it. But the way that one creates scarcity in this environment is in many ways through the smart contract. You say, look, this is what we're doing, this is how many we're doing, and we're not doing anymore.
Yeah, and pressing on the other side, these sorts of things happen in our world too, right? I mean, when Damien Hirst released his shark, nobody expected him to get like 5 more or whatever. And then he did another one. The value of that first one was still extremely high. and he has publicly stated he's going to do a couple more. And who knows what happens to the value? Clearly people don't care that there's 5. What strikes me as interesting here is that, Eric, it strikes me that it's the minting that's the signature. It's not your ownership, right? And what you have is provenance. It's like provenance matters in the art world too, right? It's like Damien Hirst goes over to Banksy's painting, let's say, signs it, auctions it off. Somebody auctions it off at Christie's. Then you buy it, Eric, because you're sort of ultra high net worth individual. Now, you are the owner of the NFT in the analogy, but the minting of it is Damien Hirst signing Banksy's painting. And the fact that in the technological aspect of it, you can, I guess, you might be violating certain people's IP, just like you would potentially be, sort of vandalizing somebody's painting by signing it, right? You can, I think, point to some random file potentially, right? But I guess my point is that you can find the analogy, I think. And crazy enough stuff happened in the contemporary art world that I used to feel like this was all about commodification, but now I'm wondering if there's actually pretty interesting aesthetic possibilities. But anyway, I'm ranting now.
I mean, I think the whole thing really comes down to much more community coordination and belief systems than product or technology. And I think the two keep getting confused. And I guess nominally I'm supposed to be here representing the technology side, but really what's happening here is we're just using these technologies as, new rails on which to build belief systems in communities. And, you take it even outside of art, that like take an example of a branded luxury good and try to decouple the value of that good based on the pure technical components, like the metal that's assembled and the craftsmanship, separate that out from the brand name, and how much of the value that people are willing to pay come from purely the technical features of it, and how much of it comes from the belief that this is part of something bigger. And take for example, you see like in the the handbag industry, the actual, even though they're really high quality luxury handbags, it doesn't cost thousands of dollars to produce these, right? maybe hundreds of dollars, but they sell for thousands of dollars because they have a label on it. And the label is a label that we all have agreed is an important label. And we know that, that these manufacturers will not overproduce. They'll restrict supply and they'll charge a certain price. And that is all how we as a kind of community of humans come to believe in the same thing through, like, it's been around since before I was born, so it must be, just true. It's like part of the state of the universe that, Gucci is what it is or Prada is what it is.
I think it can be even more than that. I think there's another layer to this. Like, one of the things that we discovered during COVID was that while these basketball games were being played without any fans, that the players started at the end. You know how normally the players will trade jerseys as a show of respect, right? Mm-hmm. And so Michael and Kobe trade a jersey at the end of the All-Star game, right? Can you imagine if you owned that jersey? How much would you pay for that, right? That's worth a lot more than I think we can all agree. We don't exactly know why, but we would all agree that it's worth a lot more to own that jersey that Kobe wore as opposed to one that you bought at the store. Now, imagine a world in which during COVID, these players can no longer trade jerseys. You know what they started trading? They started trading top shots of themselves. That's astonishing, right? And now what they're doing is we have a lot of the NBA players who are active participants in Top Shot and buying up their own moments and then selling them. And because the blockchain tracks provenance, you know that if you bought this video, this clip, this moment, that it was owned by Kevin Durant. It wasn't just of Kevin Durant, but he owned it before. So I appreciate that there's a lot of value in sort of that's created just by the whole community gestalt, right? This Prada bag is valuable because we all think it is, right? In that same way, there's even more layers to establishing value in NFTs around ownership that are decoupled from the piece of art itself.
Yeah, I think that point about provenance increasing value right through a chain of ownership is really important, and that's certainly something that can drive price right in a lot of different contexts, right? Who owns something before you? One thing I'm curious about to hear from others about is, the more we think about the status that NFTs have as this sort of just agreed upon social construct that has a sort of value. I wonder, do you even need NFTs to be pointing to anything, right? It seems like that's like at this stage in time, the convention is right. The NFT points to something, and then people are coming up with all kinds of wackadoo things that it might point to. But why have it point to anything, right? Like, if maybe the important thing is just that, here's a Damien Hirst NFT. It doesn't point to anything. Doesn't have any representational content at all, right? It's just a non-fungible token, and it was issued by this particular person. Seems equally plausible to me that we might think that carries value, again, just because of its association with a particular individual, right? You might say something similar about the NBA players, right? They may be, purchasing NFTs, right, that point to these shots of themselves on Top Shot, but do they even need to do that, right? Could, LeBron just say, here's a LeBron NFT straight from LeBron. Doesn't point to anything. It seems plausible to me that would attract a lot of attention.
That also seems plausible to me too. And Steve, correct me if I'm wrong. The smart contract aspect of this, if I'm rich, famous, powerful enough, or whatever, I'm branded enough, and this happens in the contemporary art world too. If I'm branded enough, I could sell you that token, and it could just. Is this right? That it can do something like this. A quarter from now, I'll visit your home, and the next quarter you'll be able to go to an event that's a signing event with me and get front seats for and then go backstage for 10 minutes. And then, you could just sort of write into it a whole bunch of things that happen, for instance, in the future.
Absolutely. Yeah. The Kings of Leon came out with an album that they released as an NFT. And that's part of what they did. Right? They said, look, for anybody who buys the album this way, which is purchasing an NFT, we're going to give you front row seats at the next concert. And that's written in to the code. So you can use it as a pass. There's lots of ability to sort of utilize this as a 3, 4, 5-dimensional sort of opportunity. It's not just, I mean, I think to Erich's point, you absolutely could have an NFT which basically was sitting there on its own and naked, pointing to nothing. And it might have value simply because someone created it, I suppose. Or it could have some underlying value, Stan, as you were describing. Like it could offer additional benefits that you wouldn't necessarily get otherwise.
Something that really strikes me as possible and really blows my mind if it is possible is that I think that this could be true. That somebody can bestow the value in the act of buying it in this situation. So I'm thinking of an example I ran across in, I think, in the New York Times article, one of the New York Times. There's been like 5 of these in 2 months or something. It's like this VC Li Jing, I don't know her, probably DK does. She sold a GIF of a Harvard Business article. The article was about how there's not a creative middle class. Then some investor, James Young, bought it, and at least as he described it, he bought it to try to prove the point that this can be a solution to whether there's going to be a creative, sort of artistic middle class. And it strikes me that now, if you find that NFT valuable, it's because that happened. The buying of it by that investor to sort of bench slap. Well, sorry, that's a judicial term. To sort of respond or retort to the satire. That itself is the event that you can now go around with your token and say, this happened and I own it now and it's worth money to me. I mean, I don't know if that's the right way to describe that, but it struck me as absolutely insane. But
yeah, I think finding the spaces and commonalities and like there's a whole emergent ecosystem around what we're going to choose to agree with and what kinds of, rights may be embedded in these things. But I feel like right now there's a bit of a scramble around, different layers, like who are going to be the curators, who are going to be the trophy cases that you can show. Because like the context of the trophy case really matters in online, and who are going to be the sort of the IP and rights holders. And there's a bunch of different kind of concepts that are all floating about, and I think some of them get commingled, some of them get confused by people who are, trying to push one agenda or another. But I wonder if you sort of, if we were to think out loud, is it obvious what are the primary reasons that somebody would purchase something that we would call an NFT versus maybe 20 years ago we wouldn't have called it an NFT, we'd call it some sort of like digital art, like in a virtual world. Like that was not a, I mean, it was a little fringe, but not uncommon that people would buy, virtual goods in a game or a trading card scenario. And so now we're calling them NFTs. So why do people buy NFTs but may not have, would buy NFTs but wouldn't buy, other types of virtual goods? And I think one of the big things that's different now is that there's a lot more context and consensus setting outside of particular environments. So if you own a specific, NBA Top Shots is a specific context. So it really clearly, strongly defines a context that people can understand. So owning an NBA Top Shot is an interesting thing that the world has agreed because of the IP rights that are kind of managed well through the platform. But there are other places that people might buy something because they think it's going to go up in value. They think if they buy it now, they could sell it more later. And that's not really the case in the pre-NFT environment. We didn't have as much of the kind of like speculator investor thing that I think is more common in the traditional art world. So what are the reasons? Is it purely like showing off status is maybe one, maybe, some mechanism of fan alignment or kind of demonstration, which is, demonstration of fan alignment is probably kind of a form of status. And then is like the financial ability, the potential to, to grow the value of that asset as it becomes more recognized. Is that kind of, are those the two new things here, or kind of the
I think
newly in this environment?
I think there's another in addition to those things. And those are all really valuable. I think an additional one, I'm sure many of you have seen the movie Ready Player One.
Yeah.
So in my perfect world, right, one of the things that's valuable about NFTs that are built and released on a particular blockchain is that if you have a large enough ecosystem of games or apps or functionalities that are on that blockchain, the NFT is usable in all of them. You can port them. So DK, you had a good question. Like, let's say you're playing a game right now. That's sort of a game on its own, and you earn a lot of points. And for earning the points, you get a +5 Vorpal sword. Sorry, former Dungeons and Dragons. Mm-hmm. But that Vorpal sword only has limited value, right? Because you can only use it in that game.
Right.
But what if you had a smart contract that was built into the system that said there will only be 10 +5 Vorpal swords that will ever be made? And when you get one, not only can you use it in this game, but you can use it in these 10 others. You can bring it with you, and it has the same level of value, or maybe even a different sort of functionality in this other game that increases its sort of value writ large, right? And so one of the things that we're seeing with Top Shot is that hundreds or thousands of developers are now developing on the Flow blockchain to create their own applications, some of which connect directly to Top Shot, and which would allow and enable people who own Top Shot moments to use those moments, which are held in their wallets, right, in their electronic wallets, so they're completely portable, and bring them over into the other experience.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sorry to be such a traditionalist, but I think another reason people might buy NFTs is simply for their aesthetic value. I that's why some people buy contemporary art. I mean, I agree that a lot of the value of contemporary art is, well, how best to put it, a matter of high transaction cost and bullshit. But it surely must be the case that some of it is not, or not surely, but at least I don't sort of rule it out from the get-go. And it strikes me as having this medium allows you to sort of do more interesting aesthetic things if you actually cared about doing such a thing. It also allows Lindsay Lohan to post a digital picture and say, hey, Bitcoin, and it goes to NFT for, Ether, that's bought by Ether. And, so she gets to pretend she's a digital artist also, obviously. But the line between celebrity and celebrity artist has always been a little bit fuzzy anyway in the art world. So I don't see that as a big deal,
I think that
we've got go ahead.
It was just the point there, Stan, about sort of doing it for aesthetic value. I feel like remains tricky to me. I mean, so I can definitely see how there might be artistic or aesthetic potential, right? Things that you could do with NFTs, right? Some examples of which have sort of been coming out in this discussion that would be interesting. But when you talk about somebody in like the, contemporary high art market buying something for aesthetic value, right? They're at least getting something on the other side, right? Like, if they love that shark, right, they could have that shark and display it somewhere, right? And get the benefit of, gazing upon it, right? In addition to being the owner. What I think is trickier in like the, the Beeple case that everybody was writing about is like, well, what do you get? Is there something that Metacoven or whoever bought that, right, got out of buying it? Aesthetically, right, beyond the investment value of the NFT, like that's really not clear to me, because we can all have that aesthetic experience. Like anybody can download that file and look at that work. So that's a lot. I think a lot more tenuous.
Yeah, that's interesting. I mean, so an analogy here is, there's this contemporary artist who strews about a whole bunch of licorice candies in a gallery room. The aesthetic value, I presume, is, you have to go there, experience it, walk away. And then there's a problem of commodifying that after. And what happens is they gather those candies up, they put it on the auction block at Christie's, and it sells for millions. But you're right. I guess your point is that what are you buying? You're buying a bunch of candy. It doesn't mean anything. You're buying the artist saying, there was a moment in time in the art world where somebody could go in the room, have this aesthetic experience, and now I want you to pay me for it because I'm awesome. I mean,
But it's
Yeah,
not only
correct.
the artist, it's the community of people around there who gazed upon that original thing and said, that's the real one. That's the one that we appreciate. And so it's this collective shelling point that gets established that like this is the licorice that matters. There's something more meaningful about this licorice than the stuff you can buy at Walgreens or CVS down the street.
Well, you got to be careful because there's not even causal history linking them. So what happens sometimes is that they have to end up replacing a lot of these contemporary art things because they deteriorate. That's what happened to Damien Hirst's first shark. They had to reformaldehyde another. It's actually a different shark. You know, and they had to. I think when they moved the exhibit, similarly, they have to use different candies. I think that's what happened in one of the cases where it moved international boundaries and they used a different candy from like not Chicago, and there was like some uproar about it. You know what I mean? So it's hard to say. You can't even sort of pin it on causal history from the exhibit.
Right. There's somebody else who's kind of responsible for the piece, even if the pieces of the piece, like the construction components, have changed. It was probably just a joke, but I thought I heard somebody once say something like they have I think the Smithsonian has like the original axe that George Washington used to chop down the cherry tree, but they had replaced the head 3 times and the handle 5 times. I don't know if that's true or if that's a joke, but you know, what makes it the original anymore? even your body, don't you refresh your cells? You know, it's kind of like, you know, every few weeks or something. I think you're a totally new person, but you're still.
I mean, one of the things too that like, I mean, so like some of the examples that Steve was talking about, where people are sort of like building in other things that you get like from having the NFT, like the ability you get to go to the concert, you get to like whatever, an example where it's attached to a particular artwork somewhere, even if you don't have it right now, but you could, right, cash it in, kind of, you know, all of those ways in which you get certainly still, you know, just sort of like a social convention of granting something value, but then also something that like backs that. And that's the thing that I feel like is missing in at least some of the current applications of NFTs, is like the thing that's doing the backing, right? So like, you know, when I was, you know, like 9 years old, I played Magic the Gathering. And when I cleaned out my mom's house a couple of years ago, I found all these old cards. And I got in touch with a friend of mine who, you know, has a collectible card store. And I was like, hey, like, do any of these have any value? And he was like, oh yeah, like that one's worth like a few $100s. And I was like, whoa, okay. And like, what makes that the case, right? What makes that possible, you know, 25 years later is, right, the social convention of people still caring about this thing, but also, right, the physical backing of the fact that there's a limited number of these particular cards, right, in circulation. And if you care about this thing, right, then that makes that scarcity, you know, relevant or significant, right? So what's weird, they'll still think about like the Beeple case or like art cases where you have the NFT that has no backing or relationship that's grounded in any further, you know, rights or entitlements or anything, is that all you have is the social convention. You don't have that other thing. And so it's like, it seems like it's much easier for the whole thing to collapse. But that's getting into, I guess, like the sort of the economic side of things, which I'm very much not an expert in.
I noticed I haven't been moderating the chat very well, but I noticed tons of questions coming up here. One, Mishti was asking basic logistical question, which is still a mystery, is if we wanted to mint and sell an NFT, what literally would we do? And Steve mentioned you can go to OpenSea and do it in 5 minutes. So I wonder, Steve, can you give us a little overview of what that means or how that works?
Sure. Yeah. Well, so I was actually just watching a talk yesterday where the main person on the talk did this. So they had a picture that they had drawn by their sister, I think, for their birthday, and they go on to OpenSea, and you basically there's a mechanism. It's like 5 easy steps. It's like you hit a button that says create an NFT, and you're choosing the blockchain on which you create it. You're choosing the underlying scope. You're choosing how many get minted, and you go ahead and create it. You pay a little bit of gas fee, which is the cost to basically, for folks who don't know, the cost of enabling the transaction on the blockchain, because everything requires approval, and that approval takes compute power. And so there's a small payment. I think in this case it was $9.35, and your NFT was minted. And you could offer it up for sale on the OpenSea marketplace, and people could either choose to buy it or not. But the process really is, I mean, as a simple matter, tremendously easy and straightforward. Trying to create value from it is a different question. But the act of creating an NFT and offering it for sale is very simple.
And do OpenSea created NFTs? You mentioned gas. So are we talking Ethereum? Do you deposit Ethereum into OpenSea in order to pay the gas fees?
Yeah. So they would determine the gas fee at the time, and if you were doing it on Ethereum, then it would be a certain amount of ETH. They translate that into a dollar value for you, just so you can have a sense of how much you're paying. But then yes.
And so you create the NFT, and then you can market it on your Instagram. If you had 1 million Instagram followers, you can market it there and sell, presumably create context and community around your creation there and sell it. Do you end up selling it? You market it in US dollars, you market it in ETH, or?
I think that if you're doing it on OpenSea, my guess is that it offers in ETH, but that's, I'm not certain about that, right? But I think that one of the recent changes in tech, right, with CryptoKitties, you could only purchase in ETH. Mm-hmm. One of the big changes with Top Shot, because the goal was to really make this technology available to everybody, is that you can purchase with your credit card.
That's backed on Flow, is it?
Correct. And so so go ahead. Sorry, DK.
I was going to say, can you tell us about Flow and the kind of block? Because Flow is a blockchain built by Dapper Labs, the team behind CryptoKitties and NBA Top Shots, right?
Yeah. So when they built CryptoKitties, it broke Ethereum, right? It slowed it down to such a degree that they discovered that many blockchains are not built for scalability of that type, right? For many, many, many thousands of transactions per second, or the cost of those transactions would become impossibly high, right, to try to manage them. And so people were waiting weeks to be able to manage their purchases on CryptoKitties, and that wasn't a good result. And so they built a new, highly scalable form of blockchain that they've called Flow, that basically operates in separate nodes that all work at the same time. They all work in parallel. And so it dramatically cuts down on the time and the cost of transactions.
And who runs the Flow blockchain?
The blockchain runs, so Dapper created it,
mm-hmm.
but the chain, once the smart contract is established, the chain runs itself, right? Just like any other chain would. It requires mm-hmm. consensus in order to make any alterations. And anybody who has a Flow token, which is the underlying sort of payment structure and system for allowing the chain to work, has a say in how the chain works.
So I got to jump off in 4, but I just want to end on this note. I think there's this broad idea that you're lowering transaction costs for certain artists, right? And you don't have to go through Christie's now. But I also think that what's been revealed, if I can just try to generate some last thoughts on this, is that if it's really true that the value that's being generated here is from the community, making sure you have sort of same blockchains, making sure there's a way in which to transport these things around, display them, etc. And I think also, look at the examples: Jack Dorsey, LeBron, Lindsay Lohan, John Cleese with his picture of a Brooklyn Bridge, a New York Times journalist publishing an article, putting it as an NFT after taking a picture or whatever. Look at these examples. These are branded people. It took a lot of money for them to be able to get somebody to pay for this stuff. So anyway, it strikes me as that, we really have to look at those transaction costs. I don't think it's just about minting something and throw it on a marketplace, right? I got no other important final thoughts. Maybe I should do thank yous, unless DK, Steve, Eric, do you guys have any last words?
No, go for it.
Awesome. Well, thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for.
Whenever I'm on certain platforms and I see all these chats or whatever about NFTs, it's like, oh God. But clearly really, there's lots of things to discuss. It's pretty amazing. So I really appreciate everybody's time. I know I promised all RenCo members that are here that we would solve the problem of aesthetic value in the first 15 to 20 minutes, just so that they would show up in the first minute. That was a lie. Sorry, everyone. Hope you still like me, though.
Well, that was a lot of fun. Thanks for taking the time and assembling the group and setting up the topic and all of that. It's been a lot of fun. Usually our lunch breaks are kind of a bit more kind of casual, reading Twitter. Maybe somebody comes by, but it was nice to kind of do it as more of a moment and a topic and getting a few kind of experts and experienced people together. So that was a lot of fun for us too. Thanks for making it all happen.
Yes, thanks for having us.
Thanks, everyone. See you guys.
And we're going to hang around here. Feel free to leave if you're done with that first hour. That was the NFT hour. And we've got another guest who's coming up that, just a friend we connected with a while back and are coming back in touch with. And he's going to tell us about what he's building at Comaful. So Stanley is, I think he's going to show up here in a minute or so. But until then, we'll probably hang around and see what else is going on. We'll see if Mishti's around, if she wants to come back to the stage. Mishti is our regular co-host here. I'm going to configure the stage a little bit. Mishti.
Hey.
Welcome.
That was so cool.
Hey. That was fun. Thanks for all the good questions and commentary in the chat. Looks like the chat was really going off. I noticed George was talking about BitClout and creator coins. Is that something you've looked into at all?
Not really. Just remember us talking to Gabby about it a little bit, but I saw that you have a BitClout going under your name.
Oh, I think they just make those up. I didn't set that up in particular.
So how does that work? Can you just make it for anyone else if you're on the platform?
I'm not certain, but I think what happened is they did some sort of crawl of Twitter. They picked a certain set of accounts that they wanted to include for one reason or another. And I think I was just, caught up in that updraft of, accounts that they wanted to have on to start, but it's not from agreement from the account holder. So you can own a Twitter account and they, crawl it, and they don't really ask you necessarily if you want to be represented there, but people can start buying and selling your creator coins. And George says it's auto-generated for top 15,000 Twitter influencers. So is that based on audience sizes on Twitter? Is that? I'm not super familiar with all the details there. But I think it is an interesting kind of set of behaviors. While we're waiting for Sydney, I haven't seen Sydney show up, so I'm gonna.
Oh, I just sent her the link. She just emailed asking about it, so she should be on soon.
Oh, Sydney?
Yeah.
Is it he? Yeah.
Oh, he. Sorry.
That's okay. Let's see, George. We're in the interim. We've got our next guest is teed up, but in the interim, it sounds like you've been exploring BitClout a little bit. We didn't get to any of your comments.
Yeah.
What's
nothing big, and I have to hop on just a minute, which probably is good timing for your next guest. But I was just looking at it as both a super interesting example of like what you can do to essentially bootstrap a network in the broader influencer creator space. We think a lot about like the creator economy, if you will, in Li Jing's term. And I thought this is an example of both like how funny and controversial they were with like getting a bunch of folks onto the network all at the same time. I thought it was also super interesting because creator coins can be a way you can actually monetize and enable monetization of like purchases and transactions for the creator economy. So that whole theme is super interesting. And third, I also thought it was super interesting because this is the team that was behind that original stable coin. So Mishti, you may or may not have run into these guys before, but they're all ex-Princetonians, actually.
Oh, really? Wow.
guessing Michigan may be off or whatnot, but it's I think if I remember correctly, it was the team behind Basis Protocol.
Sorry, I think I might have missed some of that. That's the team that did what?
Anyways, I thought that was super interesting. If you look as well, it seems like it's a super simple way that people are actually able to also monetize on their fame, because my understanding is that you're able to actually get a percentage of the market value of whatever you end up actually being able to. If you look at like what BitClout does, is like the top celebrities on Twitter already have very, very substantial market caps on their coin, right? Like Elon Musk per coin, it's currently worth what is it, like 100? I think like $100 something. So the market cap for Elon Musk's coin is already $25 million. I don't know how easy it is for Elon to monetize this or be able to get access to this, but it already has allocated to Elon Musk a $3 million portfolio, supposedly. Right? So if you're a celebrity on Twitter and whatnot, this might actually be also a super clever way of getting them bought into the network, because if you can join the network and instantly get a $3 million payday, that may not be such a terrible thing.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Wow.
Anyways, cool. I have to jump to another meeting, but great seeing you guys.
Thanks for the thoughts. Good to see you, George.
Yeah, you too, guys.
All right, we'll see you. And I'm going to invite Sydney up. Sydney.
Hey, how's it going?
Hey, good. How are you doing?
Good. I hear some BitClout conversation going on.
Yes, are you a BitClouter?
I have a BitClout. I haven't explored it as much as I probably should. I love communities and NFTs and all these dynamics, so it's super fascinating to see, but I haven't played with it as much as I probably should.
Yeah, we were just the first hour of our lunch break today was kind of focused on the topic of NFTs. At our PC, cool. From some of the chat, we were talking about a bunch of topics, NBA Top Shots and BitClout came up. So we kind of wanted to do a few minutes with George while we were waiting to get you all set.
Fantastic. One of our investors was one of the early builders in the NFT space, actually. And I remember him telling me 3 years ago, like, oh, we're pivoting our game. Like, it's already a popular game. And I saw it in the App Store top charts. And I was like, oh, this is a successful game. Why are you pivoting it into NFTs? This sounds like a crazy idea. Why are you doing all this stuff? But now they're blowing up. They're like one of the largest NFT market cap things being traded. It's crazy. It's super cool to see.
So they're still a game, but now they have NFTs in the game?
Exactly. So I don't think it's like a generalized part anymore, but it's called Sandbox. And you can buy sand and land. And today, I think it was today or yesterday, they had a really cool sale where the Winklevoss twins just bought some land in their virtual game. So it's starting to really take off.
I'm going to share a link here. Is it? Sandbox.game?
Yes, I believe that's it. Yeah.
Wow. Oh, wow. Here I am again, wishing that we have screen sharing coming next week into Highlighter, but right now we can't share the screen, so we'll just have to click away and look at it. But I'm looking at it right now. It looks a little bit like Minecraft style, kind of blocky chunks.
Exactly.
And it says play, create, own, and govern a virtual world made by players. So it's kind of like maybe Minecraft meets NFTs for a. I don't know if that's a.
Yeah, I think it's a really good way to think about it. And the cool part about it is like you are buying land, right? So there's actual like real estate that's being part of it. And there's a lot of really interesting mechanics there. And if you join their Discord, they have like creators that are making crazy art in there using all the tools that they have. Like they're really good at community building. And that's one of their secret sauces. So it's really cool to see them take off. But I remember years ago, I was literally thinking, are they out of their minds? Like the game is already working and then you're going to throw in this whole new technology in it. And this was after the whole crypto crash like a while back. And I was like, man, this is crazy. But they're doing very well.
Wow. So what was it? Originally, it was this game before it was NFTs and the game itself was successful. Then the NFT kind of economic ecosystem was layered on top. And did you mention that they were top of the app stores, but it looks like right now is it a very web focused experience? So
NFTs make it very difficult to be in the app store in general. It's extremely difficult to do it. And there's a lot of regulations that are involved with, this whole ecosystem. So it's really difficult to put it in the app store. I'm sure they have a plan. I haven't talked to him about that plan, but I've seen a couple of games where they're trying to integrate NFTs and put it in the app store. And the way they do it is they abstract it completely out. So you can only transact on web, but you can use the items you get in the app itself. And so I've seen a couple of games trying that, but it's not easy to put an NFT on the app store right now.
Right. So it sounds like they were successful with the core game behavior on the app store, and then when they retooled the NFTs, they went more web focused because it's a bit more of an open ecosystem for kind of marrying these two experiences.
Yeah, I believe so. And you don't have to give away the 30% cut to Apple, which is always
right. Which is also probably why having it in app stores is tough.
Exactly.
Have you been hearing any hints of people on Comaful being intrigued by and interested in NFTs for what they're making?
We had a couple of people emailing us actually, just briefly mentioning NFTs, and I was so surprised. I mean, the Gen Z demographic is very crypto native and understands a lot of these things. And someone sent me even I think it's called minds.com or something along those lines. It's like a crypto social network, and it's somewhat similar, I guess, to BitClout in some ways, but there's no buying and selling. Instead, you pay to do things, you pay to like and follow and things like that, and you can earn by doing things. And he was on that site too. So it's really interesting to see that some of our users are, I guess, using crypto in ways that I would have never expected. And some of them are considering doing NFTs. So we're seeing if we can help them with setting some things up, but it's still super early days and so many things that we need to figure out. So the way we're thinking about it is, can we take an NFT concept and one example, the wacky idea we had was, could you take a scribble sound of someone actually writing or someone reading a story out loud that's on Comaful, and then turn that into an NFT. And then if you own that, maybe you get some sort of benefit on the site, and we can programmatically do that. So that's kind of how we're thinking about it, but it would be still very rudimentary, still very early days.
Cool. So, just for kind of full context, it's been a while. I think last time we meet, I want to say we were at Pancho Villa Taqueria.
Yes,
in the mission on it's 16th. Yeah, 16th. Yeah. And I think we were each interested. I think we got connected. We were each interested in books and reading and how reading was going to evolve. So it's kind of a broad kind of topic interest overlap. And then I think at the time, Highlighter looked a lot different, and I think Comaful looks a little bit evolved from where it was back then. So, maybe it's worth just doing a quick 30-second catch up on each of the kind of product spaces so that we get a little bit of context, and then we can kind of learn more about kind of what's happening with Comaful and what you've learned building there.
For sure. I think the biggest change since we last spoke is how we think about the product overall, which is that storytelling. When you ask a teen today, what do you think about stories? They're like, we love stories. Stories are awesome. We love Instagram stories, pet stories, and all these stories. And we can see what they ate for lunch and what people are doing and all the dances that they're doing. And for us, that's a type of story, but it's not the story that we wanted to focus on. And we've been thinking a lot about, how do you make a story fun? How do you make something that traditionally is this 4-inch thick? And I see a bunch of books in your background there, which is quite gorgeous as a background, I must say. But how do you make that really fun and interesting to a generation that more or less popped out of a womb holding a phone in their hands? Mm-hmm. And how do you make that fun? So we've been thinking a lot about, how do you create a format to do that? And the what you see on the site today is kind of the early versions of that. It feels a little like a picture book, which is conveniently also the last time reading was really, really fun to a lot of these youngsters, where it was used as a reward and not like you're required to read and your parents have to sign off on it and then you have to write a 5-page essay on it. So it was one of the times where it was still really, really fun. And we've thought a lot about, how do you make that format interactive? How do you add interactive elements on top of it? How do you add monetization on top of it? And it's really down to the core format. So I think the format's evolved a bit since we last spoke, and we've thought a lot about how deep can you go with this format and what can you do with it that a traditional book just would never be able to.
Mm-hmm. And it looks like when I'm clicking through on the core site, I see a story called "Don't Let Me Fall in Love with You."
Yeah.
And so it looks like, if I were to just sort of describe what I'm seeing, it's kind of a visual, like a big visual kind of a space in the sky and the stars, and a title page, and then I can click next, and I go through kind of sentence by sentence the story with different kind of colored backgrounds. So is that the core format of how people create here?
It is. And what you're looking at is an interesting one because it's a fourth wall story. So the way it's written is someone's trapped behind the screen and they're tapping through to kind of build a relationship with the person that's trapped behind the screen and who's trying to escape. And the plot is if you let me escape, then you have to be trapped behind the screen. So it's like this whole fourth wall story, and it works really well with the format because the format itself is a tap through experience. And I saw the mention, Mishti, of Hardbound, and I actually met Nathan when he was working on Hardbound, and we were discussing a lot about the differences, because for us, we were the UGC model. How do you get a community to create? And Nathan had this idea of like, how do you create a studio around this and professionals to really create high quality content? And so there were a lot of like interesting differences, and we had really interesting discussions around this.
Totally. Yeah, with the UGC stuff, I was also curious, like, what kinds of people seemed to really get it right away when you were first starting, and then has that evolved over time in terms of who seemed to be the most enthusiastic creators on this?
I think some of it was our fault, because early on we didn't make it intuitive enough. So early on, we found that teens got this pretty quickly because it felt like stories and Instagram stories, but traditional authors, especially ones, and there are a couple of well-known authors that use the site, but when they would show up on the site, they'd be like, what the heck is this? How the heck do I create? What does this button do? Where do I go to do this? And I think that was partly just our fault, but certainly teens got it just right away, and people who kind of understood that, hey, the attention spans are shrinking, and these are the types of things that I can create on here, testing stories, trying out new things, experimenting with the formatting. The best example I can give is, I think within the first year of the site's life, someone created this teddy bear story, and they took pictures of their teddy bears and then basically had it go through life. It had an existential crisis. It had, friends that were lost and all these things. And you had these visuals of those characters going through it. And it's just so second nature for a teen to do that. But for someone else who's looking at this as like, oh, is this a PowerPoint? Like, how does this work? It's a little more difficult.
When I look at it, and apologies if this is too obvious, because I know you look at this every day, but when I look at this, I kind of feel like it's a creative format that maybe is best consumed on Comaful, but flavors of which could be consumed in other places. And I wonder if that's an idea that you would believe, and if you're sort of pressing on that thread, or sort of how do you think about that?
The biggest growth channel for Comaful right now is when users and community members and what we call comrades take the stories on the site and then share them externally. And I think the best way to do that would be to turn these into vertical videos, because if you can make them look beautiful and vertical, and like the reason why we haven't done this yet is you need some level of animation in it. It can't just be a static page that's just flowing. There needs to be some sort of movement to really make it eye-catching and interesting. So we need to build a bit of technology to make that happen. But yes, like 100%, we want these to be on Instagram stories and TikTok and to be shared everywhere. Yeah,
I could also imagine that the format may, I think when we hung out, I think we talked about these short fiction tools that were getting developed at the time, to kind of messaging. I think like was Hooked one of them, and there was kind of a whole Yarn was another. And in something that was really nice about those as a format was that they kind of had this fiction cliffhanger binge necessity or kind of mentality that was part of the creative process and part of the consumption process, for sure. And they use it as a monetization point. But I actually think that it can be just used as a like audience building point for people who create in this format. So what I'm imagining is like, and I understand there's a little bit further out because you have to build the technology to make the animations and stuff. But like you create like this unconstrained canvas on Comaful where you can tell whatever story you want. And if it actually turns out to need 2 or 3 TikTok swipes to get to it, you can actually help people build an audience, like help them figure out how to structure the cliffhangers at the boundaries of the TikTok video, and then say follow here for the next chapter, right?
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, I think there's a lot of really cool stuff we can do there. And one tangential example I like to kind of think about as a thought experiment is, imagine you're creating a story that's someone going on a treasure hunt. and there's a pot of gold, and someone's going through that narrative, and they're tapping through all the pages, right? And you hit a point where you hit a door, and this door has a lock. And somewhere in the first 30 pages that you read is a key. And if you tap 3 times or you do up, down, swipe or whatever, you can unlock that key because there's a box that's holding the key. And there's a lot of mechanics you can do with that. So one, you could tie that with monetization, where if you want the hooked and yarn kind of monetization, you can say, hey, there's a store, you can pay 50 cents or get the locksmith to come over here and just open the door for you. Or go back, figure out how to find that key. Or if you want it to be a growth mechanism, what if you had, like, the door was just strong enough for one person to knock over? Or it's too difficult for one person to knock over. But if you have 3 friends running at the door at the same time, then all 3 of you can knock it over. And there's just like really interesting mechanics and growth loops, I think, that could be done.
Yeah, that's cool. Have you figured, like, is there a certain style of creation that, like, you're talking about different types of like hooks and collaborations and stuff, but is there a certain style of kind of creation that like people really get and see and understand? Or have you do you guide people through different genres or different techniques for storytelling? Or how much of it is like people come with a composition in their mind, they just need the tool to get it out, versus how much does the tool actually help inform what story they want to tell?
It's a little of both, and we're trying to do a better job of the second, which is using the tool to help inform. And one feature we're about to release is this album feature. So you can come to the site and we'll provide like these image albums that you can automatically, have images populated, and you can write the captions on top of them. And a feature we just started testing, it's kind of hidden right now because we were just testing it and we treated it as an Easter egg when we released it, is what we're calling co-mixing. And co-mixing allows you to take any story on Comaful and then basically steal the images and then heavily credit the original creator. And that allows you also to not have to have an original idea. You can come onto the site, you can take the most popular story on the site with the most cool visuals. They'll always get credit for it, no matter how many times it gets co-mixed. And you can create on top of it. And so as an example, if you took that teddy bear example from earlier, now you can go back and then you can write new dialogue on top of that teddy bear and do really cool things with those teddy bears, even if you don't have a teddy bear yourself or you don't want to take those pictures. So there's a lot of cool stuff that can happen there. And I think we can really go in the rabbit hole on that end. But today it's mostly people coming onto the site already with an idea, and then they share it. And then they start realizing, wait a minute, there's a community here. There's things I can share here. There's things I never would have thought of sharing otherwise because it's just very different than my normal form of creation. And then it goes into this whole rabbit hole.
How do you, as kind of the platform kind of creator, moderator, admin, how do you think about what gets surfaced and when, and how do you get the right stuff in front of people? What are sort of the network structures at play here?
We can certainly do a better job of this as well. The way we think about it, and actually the way I think about the site in general, is if you were to abstract away the front-end elements and you just made it a database, you end up having effectively like a virtual world that you can build on top of it. So like if you took the same database elements and you wanted to build like a Roblox or a MMO or something like that, a virtual world of some sort, you could do that. And the way we look at it is like, if you did that, what would be the optimal network structure for these communities? And the way we've kind of looked at it is each village would be effectively a genre. So if you're like a Harry Potter fan and you really want to hang out with other Harry Potter fans, there should be a village for Harry Potter, and there should be a village for sci-fi, and there should be a village for romance. And the frame of a village makes it so it's much more of a community feel. So it's not just like this is a feed of content and you can go and look at that piece of content, but how do you build conversations between people? How do you get people to have civic engagement and actually take part in what the Harry Potter fandom is doing on Comaful? And those are all things we're kind of thinking about, but primarily the network structure is we have individual feeds based on your interests. So if you are a Harry Potter fan, there's a dedicated Harry Potter feed with trending stories, with stories that are new, within a certain threshold, so we can weed out the spam and things like that. But there's 2 feeds there, and then we also have different ways for people to engage with the community. So we have community pages, like there's a Harry Potter page, and then they host like topics and engagements and events and contests and all these things.
And are you like hand curating things into the Harry Potter feed, or do creators self-tag this I'm writing about Harry Potter, or some mix of the two?
They self-tag, and then there's a reporting system. So if you report, then we're able to say, hey, this actually isn't Harry Potter and you're abusing the tagging system, and then we restrict your ability to tag.
Got it. Yeah, I noticed.
Yeah, that's so cool. I just linked this latest piece that Eugene had written in February about how like remixing is to creation. It just reminds me of what you're saying about like the classic writer's problem is just staring down a blank page to whatever extent you can either whether it's like through having these communities where people are part of like worlds where you can pull different characters, or I remember in elementary school we would get like photo prompts for stories and stuff.
Yes.
Just like whatever you can do to start sparking some of that. Plus it reminds me of some like GPT-3 stuff that we've talked about a little bit in terms of
like GPT-3 a lot. I think there's a lot of cool tools that we'll be able to build for our community with that. But Misha, you bring up a really good point. We thought about collaboration since we started the platform, and we just never crack it. Like we tried all types of things. It was just really hard to crack writer collaboration and remixing and things like that because people really love words. They're words that they create. And it's one thing to remix your TikTok dance, but it's another thing to take the exact words that you wrote or the character that's your baby and then turn that into something new. And it took us a while, but the very simple mechanic of just taking the images, that took us a while to figure out. Like, it's so obvious now, but back then it was very much like, how do we do this in a way where you don't take the words? But it took us a while to figure out that like doing just the images was the right way to do it.
Yeah. Are there people who go trying to create templates that other people would build on top of? Like the goal of the creation is to be used as a content platform for others? Yeah,
this should have been the sign for us earlier that we should have done this. There was someone who built an entire website, and I think it was called comicaltips.com, if I remember correctly. I'm not sure if it's still up, but they had a full website where they had image templates, and then people could just go there and then download images and then use them in their stories. And I think he might have turned into a consulting company or something at this point, where like creators on our site and people externally. But yeah, that was an early behavior, and the stories were better. Like when people used those images, they were better. They even had, this is another thing we have to build because the brilliant mind that created this website, he added like these guidelines of like, put the text here. Like he would have the image and then he'd be like, place the text here, place the text here. These are the optimal spots. And he would have like these spots to do it. And it was just genius because a lot of writers would come to the site and they don't have the visual native language to be able to create something that's really inherently visual. But if you tell them where to put the text and where to put all the pieces to make it look really good, they'll do it. And I think those are all things we need to do. But he's just ahead of our time, at least, and ahead of the game.
How do you think about memes with respect to Comiful? Like, it feels like there's a creative process, kind of a foundational piece that if people are taking others' work and remixing it and co-mixing it, that feels like the kind of things where memes could emerge. And maybe you think they're good for the site, or maybe you think they're bad for the site. Or I'm just curious, sort of, when I say memes, do you light up, or do you?
This is a controversial topic because we have a lot of fights internally in the community. Not me specifically, actually. I mean, me too. But within the community itself, we've had factions for people who want memes and people who don't want memes, and that's led to a lot of tension and a lot of things that we've had to build. So I have to be a little careful in how I communicate with regards to this, just in general with our community. Yeah. But the stance that we've ended up on is we've always been wrong when we've thought about what Comiful would become. Like the types of stories that did really well, we just never expected, and we've never been able to expect. And the way the curation often works is if you create something and then the community really loves it, they upvote you, and that's really how you end up on the trending feeds. That's how you end up in different categories. So the idea that there's a certain type of content that is not hurting anybody, that's not, causing any issues directly, is somehow inferior to another form of creation. That is something we try not to play judge and jury on. We try and let the community decide on those. And the hope is that because we have these community pages and we have all these specific verticals, if you love poetry, you can go to the poetry feed and you'll always find great poetry. And if a meme shows up there and it's not like actually a poem, but just happens to have some fun things within them, then we'll remove it and we'll make sure to police those. So we hope that we can build, like, kind of similar to a library or a bookstore. You can go into a bookstore and you can buy Funko Pops, and they're not books. You can buy coloring books. You can buy all types of things. And there's an aisle dedicated for every single one. There's bestsellers and recommendations for every single category. But it's not, not every book in there is going to be for you, and that's okay.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Poetry is also really interesting. I feel like, because what you said around people feeling ownership over their words, it's also tricky because it's difficult to literally extract like 2 sentences and have them make sense within someone else's context. But with a poem, I could see like viral things happening that haven't really happened, or to my knowledge, with poetry before, where you take like a line or two and then explicitly, maybe if you click on that, it like takes you back to the original writer's profile, but people can build on that and use different like poetry formats and stuff. basically with like less linear kind of narrative based text.
Yeah, almost like a GitHub repo where you can kind of follow where the idea came from and how it like ebbs and flows. You can certainly do this with linear narratives too, or I guess it wouldn't necessarily be linear anymore. But if you take like a world, and I'll give you an example of something we're thinking about testing. Well, we will test. It's just we haven't gotten around to doing it. Is we have these we have a logo and it's not public yet. Like I guess it is public if you go onto our store and so some certain pages, but it's like this cute comma ghost looking thing, and it's named Comadu. And the universe around it we're calling the Commaverse. And the plan is to make a wiki where the Commaverse has like a comma mama and a comma baby and a comma llama and a comma saurus, all these fun characters. And, they shop at Comazon, which, ships their packages, like all these things. And the hope is that we can get the community, and we've already started seeing some of these because we teased it a little while ago, where they'll just be able to create these characters and universes and storylines, and it's all based off of the core wiki. And if someone comes up with a really cool idea, and like someone came up with comma pun, I think, or something like that, we'll take that and put it into the wiki, and it'll be canon, and then people can keep building on top of that. I think there's like really interesting things you can do with that, and that's the guinea pig for us to eventually have any story to be able to do that.
That's really cool. Yeah.
I'm curious how much effort you put into like refining the creative tool itself. Like, do you feel like the core creative process and structure is kind of the best version of how people would want to use Comaful, or like, are there, you mentioned, you've tried a few remix experiments and haven't found something that, remixing words that you liked that much, but I wonder like, how much experimentation do you think about in the actual creative tool? And are there simpler versions or more extensive versions, or what do you dream about there?
Early on, we did a lot of rapid testing to the point where we reached some sort of local maximum in terms of like what % of people would be able to figure it out and get to a certain point. There's still a lot of onboarding stuff that we could have done, but we realized that it just was, the way it was constructed, we kind of threw together pretty quickly, and there are just much better ways to create that flow. So we actually have a complete redesign of this, and we ran a bunch of experiments on that, and most of our experimentation now happens on this redesign. That's not public yet, but we have a group of private testers that test that specific creation flow, and we find that to be a lot better because, one, it's a lot more intuitive for a new user. It feels a little more like it feels something more similar to what you might expect for like a PowerPoint creator or something along those lines. The tools are in similar places, and it allows us to scale a lot better. So when you come onto the page, you don't get overwhelmed with, all these things that you can do. But if you are an advanced creator and you want to use advanced tools, those are all hidden under drop-down menus and can get into the nitty-gritty of that. And that allows us to onboard you to the overall site with something pretty simple. Like one example of something that should exist on the site that just doesn't, and it's in this new version, is being able to create a theme. So maybe you're writing a horror story, and not every creator wants to go and find every single image. It takes a while. Some creators do it, other creators don't. But now you should be able to click, I'm writing a horror story, and you'll just get dark, ominous themes in your background, and they all fit nicely. They won't look terrible. They won't look amazing, but they'll look okay, and you can just write. And I think there's just a lot of things that we can build there, and it's heading in that direction. And we'll be experimenting a lot more on top of this, and we have been on the new version. But the old one hasn't seen a lot of love in a while.
Mm-hmm. And do you think about like structures that could, like, I don't know, I'm just drawn to this idea of how important remix culture is, and how much simpler it is to get started as a creator if you're kind of riffing on somebody else's thing. Like there's a stub of something there. You don't have that kind of blank canvas syndrome. And I wonder, like, I don't know, I'm just kind of like imagining something as easy as like seeing like a single stub of a story. Maybe you came up with it, or somebody from the Comaful platform team, is creating these stubs as like kind of the beginnings of what become collaborations, but people are giving like their first reaction. Like it's almost like you write page 1, and then the community writes a bunch of page 2 and page 2 prime and so on. Does that kind of thing, have you played with that idea? Does it work? Does it not work? Do you think there's something there?
We tried a variation of this that semi-worked. It wasn't as home run, so we didn't end up going too deep in it. But if you look at the subreddit R writing prompts, it's very similar to what you're describing, where someone will write a seed of an idea, and it's typically a pretty good idea. And in the comments, you'll see people go on and write really cool stories out of it. And the coolest thing about this is there have been movie deals, I believe. Don't quote me. I'm pretty sure there have been movie deals done on some stories that have been written on our writing prompts.
Oh, that's cool.
So it's super interesting. And that is, I think, also one of the correct ways to do it. Like a common iteration I see and a common pitch I see is, hey, can we do you write a chapter and then someone else writes the next chapter and someone else writes the next chapter after that. And then what you get is a very disconnected story where the beginning sets up something and then the next person takes it in a completely different direction and you go another different direction and you don't get this cohesive storyline. But I think in the way you're describing it, if you have one seed and every person chooses a branch and they just go deep and write the full story after that, you can certainly do some really interesting things.
Yeah, I actually I didn't know this writing prompts, but I just shared the link to it in chat.
It's really cool.
I'm looking at it right now. There's like 5.7 thousand upvotes on this writing prompt. Angels are thought to be beautiful, while demons are thought to be vile and disgusting. However, the truth is angels are extremely scary, while demons are beautiful and elegant creatures. And I was like, go.
It's crazy. And the creator of our writing prompts actually has a book of a ton of writing prompts, and he used to just share them all himself. And then at some point, the community just kind of took over, and it blew up into what it is today. But it's just so cool to see this really blossom.
Do you know how many promptians, that's what they're called, promptians are on the subreddit?
Ooh, I don't know. It's got to be a big number, though.
Like, just give me a number without clicking. Did you click?
No, I didn't click. Okay. I'm going to guess 1.5 million.
You're off by a factor of 10.
Wow.
15.2 million.
Wow. That is crazy.
This is fascinating. I feel like this. Yeah, I feel like this is so. I mean, such a demonstration of energy. Is there a tool that helps? It feels like this is like hurt by being contained within a subreddit. Like, meaning it's nice that the subreddit can demonstrate the energy and appetite, but like the structure of Reddit is not designed to make this work well.
Right.
So yeah, it feels like, is there some other tool that serves this need well, or why is this just kind of still happening on Reddit?
I asked the guy who started it the same question, and what he told me is many people have tried to spin out versions of this, and many people have tried to build like a vertical or like a very specific way of doing this that is better in the UI, better in how it's built, and they just never worked. And there's something about doing it on Reddit that just really works with that community, and I don't know what it is. We've often played with the idea because we get requests a lot where we'll get emails from people saying, hey, like I want this type of story and I can't find it on your site. Can you like put it out as a challenge to your community? So we'd love to put together like a little product hunt for writing prompts just within our internal community. And, we'll probably do that at some point, but I can't imagine it ever being as big as, our writing prompts. It's just such a behemoth and such a really powerful way. And I still refer people, even like when people in the community come to me and they're like, hey, where can I get cool ideas? I go like, check out our writing prompts. I mean, we have a list of prompts, but these are just way cooler.
Right. Yeah. I mean, there's so much energy going into creating and sourcing and vetting and curating that. So
yeah. Sort of a like side thing that I mentioned a little earlier. I'm curious about if you are deep into some of these like massive platforms for UGC fiction and stuff in other countries, and I was thinking of India and China specifically, but like what sort of dynamics resonate and seem useful and translatable, and maybe there are things that are just super different and wouldn't really apply to you guys, but I was curious to ask you just how you think about that space.
The most well-known and the most valuable is China literature. And China literature is this like $80 billion public company in China. And they have multiple millionaire authors, I believe, who they've been able to build up and create through that model. And the way it works, and I'll butcher the exact details, but the high level of how it works is it gates chapters. So you can read like one chapter for free, and then it just starts gating every chapter after that. And you have to pay a small amount of money to unlock each chapter beyond that. And it works really, really well. People are willing to pay. The culture in Asia for spending on virtual goods is very different than in America. However, there are a couple companies in America as well. One is a Chinese company that is pretending to be an American company. I think it's called Dream Interactive or something along those lines. But they're actually a Chinese company that incorporated in like a Singaporean country and then had like bought another entity and then like made it an American thing of some sort. But they're really just a Chinese company that's doing the same thing. And then there's another company called Radish Fiction, and Radish Fiction is about to exit, I believe. But they also do a similar model where they allow for like, you post a chapter and then you can pay to get it earlier, or you can pay to kind of read it. And like there's hard gates and soft gates. So they do some interesting models there as well. And I think that those are the models that I'm most excited about because they allow for this price elasticity of a creator or like a fan in a way that traditionally was not possible in writing. If you are a writer, the main way you make money is people buy your books. Or people watch an ad on some websites and then you get like a small fraction of that. And in the music industry, you always saw this. There were people who were willing to travel with you and pay for the backstage passes and spend like $100,000 on you, or at least around you. And that was never possible in reading and writing. And I'm really excited by the idea of that being possible, because if you have 1 million fans, chances are there's somebody there that really wants to spend on you and is willing to spend on you, but just never had the opportunity to do so. And I think these types of mechanics just give those possibilities. And you see this in Asia in particular. In India, I've seen a lot of ones that hit scale. Like there's a lot of really interesting scaled sites. I haven't seen interesting monetization mechanics, but certainly ones that have hit a chord in terms of scale and interesting mechanics.
Yeah.
When you think about,
sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, I was gonna say when you think about kind of the scale side of what you want to achieve, do you have an idea of like what do you need to unlock to get to the next level of scale? Like, do you need more creation, just better discovery for the existing creation with the existing consumer set? Or, if I think about Comaful as a bit of a marketplace between readers and writers, is one of those constrained, or is it some of each and kind of have to grow them bit by bit? Or how do you think about just like future growth and how the kind of the model of Comaful works?
I think I should start by explaining how we grow, and I think that ties very deeply into how we think about growth. So the way we've grown are threefold, effectively. The first is people sharing stories, and that might be to private group chats. So if you're like a Harry Potter fan, you might have a Harry Potter group chat, and you might put your stories into that Harry Potter group chat. That might be posting publicly on Twitter or other social media sites, and that's certainly the biggest channel for growth for us.
And is that the creator posting, or that's consumers who...
Typically the creator. Sometimes we do see some other stories being viral. Fiction on its own isn't typically super viral. Some of the more memey stuff that we talked about earlier is a little more viral, and you do see that shared a little bit more. But traditionally, the creator will share, and as a result, that's typically the biggest driver of growth. The second is SEO. So we rank for certain keywords, and that's something we've started leaning into a little bit more. And as a result, like we have very specific channels that lead to growth. And then the third is referrals. So we have specific referral systems, and that we can do a lot more work on as well. But we find that when a creator refers another creator, they tend to be much higher retained, higher quality, and just an amazing creator overall. So we think about all three of those things when we think about growth. And what you'll find in common with all of them is it's heavily tied to the creator side. So when you have a great creator and they create a story, they're the ones who share out to the network. They're the ones who create stories that eventually rank on Google. They're the ones who are referring friends that also create more stories. So those are the ones that we focus on the most. Not to say we don't think about how to grow the audience, but the creators are the ones that we find are typically the leading indicator for top line growth. So when we have more creators, typically a couple months later, we'll see that the audience growth came with it too.
Got it. And what's the fraction of people who may use Comaful or have a registered account versus people who create? Is it like a 1 to 100, or?
It's like a 5 to 100.
5 to 100. Okay, cool. And is that a metric that you're comfortable with, or do you want to try to increase that, or you don't worry so much about percentage of the community and worry more about just the tools and getting it in front of the right people?
We obviously want it to be higher, but as you grow, typically that percent shrinks. So it's going to be a battle of us making it simpler so that more people can create. So tools like co-mixing and tools like, ways to make it really easy to translate a normal story into a Comaful story, those will make it a higher percent. But as we grow, the audience just naturally always gets larger. So almost every network, that ratio skews smaller and smaller. But we do have ideas on how to make it simpler.
Right. And I noticed you build a lot for the web, but you also have an iOS app. So how do you think about the prioritization of those two?
Yeah, we have to build for the web because people share stories so frequently, and that is one of our biggest growth channels. And then the second biggest growth channel I also mentioned is also very web-centric, which is SEO, right? So As a result, we just had no choice except for to have a strong web presence. So most of our traffic is mobile web, actually, and less so the mobile app. Part of the reason that's true is also because the mobile app is complete garbage, which shows you where our priorities lie right now. But we do have a new mobile app version coming out, and we've synchronized the code base a little bit and the systems and the operations behind it. So it should be a lot faster for us to release into mobile and have higher quality mobile apps in conjunction with web. But to date, the mobile app is just really, really bad. And that's why I'm actually amazed that anybody uses the app. Like, we look at the stats and we're just like, who the heck are these people who are still
Yeah, well, I like it because it's I almost feel like it's contrarian to be building for the web these days. It's like everybody wants to build a new app, and they're like, can I be on the test flight? And we're like, there's no test flight.
But yeah, you guys are web focused first as well.
Yeah. Welcome. This is Highlighter. Back when we talked last, we were an iOS app with the
Yes, I remember. And if I remember correctly, it was like actually like using OCR to highlight like text in books, right? And then you would have like a community built around that.
Yeah. Yeah, and we had, that's exactly right. We had built that as, kind of the idea of Highlighter has always been, there's all these great ideas trapped inside long form media, and we wanted to be able to take and extract an idea out so that we can make it conversable, discussable, and sort of help the community form around those ideas. And, I think along the way, we found that the communities that were kind of creating these open spaces for didn't really have like owners or instigators when they were so open. That worked a lot better if you have like an instigator.
Yeah.
But along the way, we were instigating ourselves as kind of Zoom moderators. We would invite an author on, we would invite a bunch of audience on, and we would host these Zoom sessions, and those were a lot of fun. But then, of course, Zoom was not really built to do this, so it works well enough that it lets us do it. But then we realized, actually, we want, we have a whole list of hundreds of things that we want to be better for the kind of, show running and process that we want. So we actually ended up totally pausing on the iOS app. We haven't touched it in over a year now, I think.
Wow.
And yeah, we're exclusively web, and we're exclusively this experience you're having right now. So we're create a video, basically host a live TV show in a web browser.
That's really beautiful. And I mean, the interface is nice. I can tell like there's a lot of thought that went into this design. It's a lot of information in one small area, and it still looks clean.
Yeah, thanks. We always like look at it and we're like, oh, it can be so much better. We just need to, we still struggle, but
it's founder life.
It was worse 6 months ago.
Have you thought about like just given the space that you're in, like there's this whole Rome movement and networked mind movement and like jamming on ideas and expanding on ideas. Like, have you thought about how that intersects with Highlighter and how you're approaching it?
Yeah. I think it's a good point because there is a lot, I think, has come up recently in this kind of, I would call it, knowledge management, note-taking, 2.0, 3.0, I don't know which number we're on. But it's certainly all relevant. I think there's like, if you sort of like really zoom out, the web grew up in whatever haphazard way it did with like the web server being invented and then people building web pages and domains and sort of all of the kind of the diverse amount of content that was available on the web ended up getting kind of structured through search initially, and search was mostly tied to reputations established by domains. That could be by like the simplicity of the word or the initial registration date of the domain or last transfer date, or its proximity to explicitly human curated trusted domains like Stanford.edu. And so that kind of, explosion of information and then kind of reconstituting into a structured form that's useful is kind of, I'd call it, the late 90s, early thousands kind of time frame. And I think what's happened now, I think social networking was one divergence from that, where you started to see people posting things into spaces that were not necessarily like websites, but they were like on a website. So it's like a little bit of like a, maybe you'd call it like a walled garden that helps proxy a bunch of audience and visibility and permissions. And so there's like a lot of utility to it, but it makes it not part of the open web. And I think what's happening now is, those tools are ultimately optimized around engagement, right? They're like, how many clicks, how many likes, how many upvotes. And I think what it does is it shapes the content when the platform has such strong incentives established.
Yep.
And so I think we're sort of seeing now this new wave of different ways to organize information, different ways to publish things, and different ways to surface ideas that are on people's minds. And some of those are from like the daily journal format of like, I'm going to write what I'm doing today, and that's going to launch me into a bunch of other things that I'm thinking about. And I think that's like a healthy kind of single player starting point. And I think that's kind of the core of how something like Roam works. Right? I just started using Mem. I don't know if you played with Mem at all. Yeah, so really nicely done. I mean, just beautiful. I mean, every detail is just really, really nicely presented. I haven't really gotten deep into it yet, but I think that's another one where it's like the daily journal metaphor is kind of the starting point. But the stuff that I think is most interesting is when you can have like the public roams or the spaces where the collaboration happens. Exactly. And I have not graduated yet from the like single player siloed use case into like discovering or knowing about a forum or collective area that I can spend some time and meet the kinds of people that might be thinking. But I think a very important feature is just the fact that these are not primarily like attention based. It's like more utility based that graduates into these spaces for people to meet and collaborate, versus like, I'm gonna put in the hottest meme because I know it's going to get me the most likes or whatever people might be optimizing for with previous platforms. So yeah, I think like so take that to Highlighter. So today, you don't see this in Highlighter today, but it's still called Highlighter, and highlights we still see as very important. But instead of a highlight being extracted from OCR from a physical book, a highlight in this conception is actually a transcript of us speaking and using transcripts to create video clips. Those video clips themselves are the highlights. So we've been on for an hour 46 right now. There's probably thousands of ideas that could be extracted and discussed and shared in new ways. Yeah. Where like any audience member could see it, or somebody comes along a year later might say like, I don't know if I really agree with DK's assessment there. Let me tell you what I really think, right? And so the highlight unit now is really recutting of this thing we're creating together into like little micro versions of it. Then those become the extractable, discussable objects. And so in the sense, it has flavors of like a note. Yeah. But it's also something different. Yeah.
Someone could build an NBA Top Shot version of
yeah. Highlighter Top Shot.
Yeah, exactly. Of ideas. Like I feel like Twitter would love that. I could own some of DK's ideas or Mishti's ideas and trade it, and
Right. You laugh, but you never know.
Yes.
Yeah, we're mostly focused on like getting the tooling to work around this stuff with video streaming and live chat, and the UX is substantial. So we've really been just heads down on trying to just make everything work, and we haven't even been doing a lot here, but really we have like all kinds of like camera replacements, we can recompose the video stream in a bunch of different ways. So there's a lot of stuff. Actually, it looks like there's a bug right now. I'm not able to to change up the cameras, but yeah, that there's a lot of stuff in terms of like video composition that we really care about. And the deeper you get, the more you peel back and you find a lot more you can do. So we've been just pretty heads down on that, and we've been running these kinds of sessions where we just bring in interesting people and talk and learn about what people are building, and it's kind of been fun for us.
No, I love this idea, and I think like in a curation world in particular, one of the biggest issues I have with my database of ideas and things that I put in is it's just too much stuff. Like I put in I consume a lot of information and I highlight the things I find interesting, but now all of it's in there. And some of it I don't need. Like I have like this, I need to Maria Kondo my notes.
Yeah.
Right. Do you have pretty structured systems right now that you use?
I should. I mean, I looked at the Zettelkasten method and that whole system. I just couldn't quite get around it. The systems I have work. So I have like a system of tagging and a system where I go through my notes, and I have a daily ritual of going through and making sure I tag my conversations and interesting ideas that come in. And I have specific places I go regularly to see things that I'm working on currently. And I have a whole system. So I have whole systems built into this. But I do find that some topics that I read a lot about, so like, as an example, I read about community and virtual currencies and things like that almost every day.
Mm-hmm.
And as a result, if you go to my virtual currency page, it's like 500 or 700 different highlights. And I'm like, well, now I have to curate that. Now that I highlighted all the things that I read, but now I have to curate that into the interesting stuff of that. So it's a little less useful when I highlight too much.
Right. Yeah. And are there certain tools that you use a lot to kind of manage that kind of the highlighting? And
I have an app that a friend made actually called Command, and Command is a web browser for for iOS. And what it allows me to do is I can go through and I can just start like reading and just highlighting immediately within the browser. And what's great about it is it has an API integration with like Roam and Notion and all these note-taking apps. I use RemNote personally. It's like a cheap knockoff of Roam. And it automatically syncs to RemNote, and then I have tagging systems already built in, so it automatically tags everything that I'm reading directly from Command, which is really nice. RemNote also has an API, so as a result, people have built a lot of cool tools for RemNote. There's a web clipper, and then so anytime I'm reading something interesting on the web, I can just click web clipper, and then it'll automatically pop out. I can drag images, I can type text, I can put all of that, and it just syncs into the database. I use Air to take notes on podcasts.
Which one?
Air, AIRR. And so basically what it does is it takes transcripts of podcasts that you're listening to. And then when you're listening, you can, like if you have AirPods, you can double tap and it'll take a note of the last 30 seconds that you just listened to. If you're in a car, you can that button and it'll automatically clip the last 30 or 45 seconds as well. And then you can write your own notes. And then it also automatically syncs into RemNote. So all of that goes directly into RemNote. I don't have to touch it, and it all just syncs perfectly into everything I do. And then my last tool that I use is something called Huffduffer. And then the way Huffduffer works is it allows you to create a private audio stream just for yourself. It's like a private RSS podcast for yourself. And
almost like Pocket for podcasts? Would
sort of. Not quite. So it's not actual, it's a private podcast feed, and you can put any audio clip you want in there. So what I use it for is there's a bookmark called HuffDuff Video, and you can take any YouTube video. You press the bookmark for HuffDuff Video, and it just turns it into a podcast that then syncs into your podcast player. So now I can take any YouTube video, and personally I've been going through a GDC binge, so a lot of the gaming breakdowns, game analysis for like how to design a game or a game economy. And I'll take those, I'll HuffDuff them, it automatically goes into Air. I take notes in Air, and then automatically goes into my note-taking system. So there's a whole system that works really well for me.
Well, and I think I got the link. So Command Browser, I shared a link for that, and then Air, AIRR, highlight podcasts, and then huffduffer.com.
Exactly. Yeah.
Cool.
But they're super fascinating, and I love a lot of this because I will say ever since I started adopting the system, things have been so much better. I find ideas that I forgot from a while back, much easier to prioritize things. Every conversation I have builds on top of itself so that I can see where did an idea come from. Did DK feed me that idea? Did Mishy feed me that idea? When did they feed me that idea? And it's just so much easier to do it. And then if someone's like, hey, I need to meet a community builder, I can be like, oh, like Control P or Command P, find the people who love communities, and then just have a list of all the people who are great community builders, and I could just make those intros. So it's a really nice way to do it. And I think I've said this before, but I would pay like 10 grand to see Elon Musk's like mind, right? If he had like a Roam database and selling, I would 100% pay just to see what he's thinking about, what is he reading, what does he find interesting in this article, like what is he doodling on, what's his daily journal look like? I'd love all of that.
Right. Do you think that one of these tools or something else can finally unlock that, or how do you think that comes to be?
I hope. I mean, I compare
maybe Neuralink,
like the old Da Vinci, like when we all read like the Da Vinci drawings and illustrations. I think that the hardest part still is the collaboration point, just as you mentioned. None of them have great collaboration tools yet. I know Rome's building towards it, but it's really difficult. Like, I don't want to share my entire database with my team.
Right.
Yeah, I also want them to know all the things that like are interesting, and like it's just very difficult for me to feed things between the team.
Right.
And there are interesting ways that could be done around that. I also think there are interesting ways to stack things. Like, there are some people who do share their Romes publicly. Like, I think Visa K or something. I don't remember his full name.
Oh, yeah.
Very popular on Twitter. He shares his Rome database, some of it at least publicly, and I find it super fascinating. Like, I love going through and seeing like, oh, what crazy emperor is he reading about today, and what does he find interesting about that? Like, he's really good at curating that, and I want to see more of that. And I think that as people do more of that and build on top of each other, like maybe I have a note on a king that he's read about recently, and I can like pull that in for my notes. Like, I don't know, but yeah, I think there's interesting stuff there.
The whole angle of like monetizing that is pretty interesting too. Like we were kind of talking about the cloud and stuff, but if you had, I mean, there's no like layer that everyone refers to right now, which is tricky, but definitely for that Elon Musk use case, or maybe you're just someone who has no following, but you're really good at learning about things. And then that hasn't really been, unless you're producing like very explicit kind of narrativized content in the form of YouTube videos or like a Substack or something, it hasn't been easy to make any money off that. But if you're just like really good at pulling information together, it's like a completely new format for...
Agreed. Curation is going to be a huge point. It's very, very important.
Yeah.
Especially in an age of GPT-3. And that's a whole nother rabbit hole.
Yeah. Right. Curate the curators. That's something that came up too. Like, yeah, we'll have more and more curators, but a lot of them just won't be that good. So it's just like increasing levels of clutter in some sense, but also information that we're going to have to deal with.
Totally. Yeah, it's going to be fascinating to see where it all plays out, but curation is certainly going to be a big part of it. And yeah. I'm really excited to see, like, I can see improvements in my own behaviors and how I think just from these types of tools. And I can only imagine how sophisticated and interesting these tools will get in the next few years. Highlighter included. Like, it'll be really cool to see how this affects like how we think and the ideas that we're able to surface and curate and things like that.
Yeah.
So I know we're coming up toward the end of the hour, and so we do want to be respectful of everybody's time and end around 2. But we do have a final question we like to ask when people visit, and it's kind of it's pretty simple, and it's just, what are you curious about these days? And so it could be philosophical and long ranging. It could be something near term that kind of caught you this morning. So it doesn't have to be. It doesn't have to have more weight than you want to give it. But yeah, what is it that you're curious about?
Something I've been thinking about a lot, and I'm still trying to get smarter on. So if anybody here happens to have ideas on this, I'm actively looking for thoughts on this, are how virtual economies work. So I'm not talking about crypto. I'm talking about centralized virtual economies. So when you look at pretty much almost any mobile game at this point, there's some sort of currency. There's usually a soft currency, there's a hard currency. And what's really interesting about these economies is these economies don't have hard costs, in the sense that you don't need plastic to create I can't even think of something that's plastic, like a plastic cup. You don't need the plastic to do it. You can just virtually create one and you're good, right? And as a result, like, there are so many things you can do in these virtual economies that drive incentives. Like, if you want someone to buy that plastic cup, there are so many things you can do to make that plastic cup so desirable that everyone in the game wants that plastic cup. So there's just so many interesting things I've seen around this. And some games purposely hyperinflate their currency so that they can get people to do certain things. Others will heavily fight inflation. Others will print a lot of currency. Others won't. Others will have a way to transfer between hard currency and soft currency. Others also won't. Some will have 5 currencies, and they won't call them all currencies, but like one's a boot. And some allow the currency to do things where you can level up the currency. Like, you can match 2 currencies together and it can do something completely different, or you can use it in a level. So I've just been thinking a lot about all of these currencies and how they work, how to think about them, how to design these types of systems, because they're fascinating. They're very complicated. They're somewhat allegories of what we see in real life, but also very different. And I haven't found, like, there's a book I read called something about virtual currencies a while back, and there's not a lot around this. I think it's an MIT written book, and it was written in the early 2000s, I want to say. But there hasn't been a lot more since then, and the economies have gotten a lot more complex, and you see this with Roblox and pretty much all of these other MMOs that have appeared. So I'm curious about that, and I've been trying to find readings. I play a lot of games to try and find and figure out how they do it. But if anyone has thoughts there, I'm certainly trying to figure that out.
Yeah, that's a fascinating topic, and both relevant to today, but also, it's a human topic too that's relevant to where we came from. So
all psychology.
Yeah, so that's a good one. Well, great. Well, maybe we'll pose it on Twitter. We'll loop you in. Yeah. Cool. All right. Well, thanks for coming by and spending the time. Yeah, really enjoyed catching up.
Good to see you.
Yeah. Thanks so much.
Good to see you, Sydney.
See ya.
All right. Have a good one.